Good morning. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Warm regards from Mexico City. A very meaningful and, let's say, put it this way, packed days of talks, very well received. As we enter now in the beginning of the month of Elul, so my book was released, 60 Days, Spiritual Guide to the Holidays in Spanish. So it was a book launch, and I gave many talks around it to different audiences. Very good. So I could just say the message is getting out there, and we ground it all back into the source material. A big part of it is also Hemshech Ayin Beis, where we are now, concluding 130 pages of Ayin Beis, and we'll continue where we are up to. So we're on page 1380. Is it 13? Let's see. Yeah. Bottom of 13, well, top of 1386. We finished the paragraph, but I'm going to go over it again because we did it a little quickly last time we learned. So it's the end of bottom of 1385, top of 1386. And let's go. Yeah. I'll also say on my trip there, I had some time on the flight and a little other free time. There was not a lot of free time, but in between, over and under, I actually began writing in Hebrew. Maybe later I'll translate it into English. A summary of Hemshech Ayin Beis, especially in context of the conclusion, going through all the different components that the Rebbe Rashab did not finish and how we're reconstructing it based on the source material in the Maimorim of the Alter Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe. So I'll be sharing that as well when I have that done. So that said, where are we? So we have been learning in the last, from page 1364 till now, till 1386. So we're talking about 22 pages, 74, 84, 86. Yeah, last 22 pages has been a discussion about Mikra, Mishnah, and Talmud. 3 dimensions, 3 sections of Torah, which are actually like 3 steps in the interface between Torah, that the interface that Torah provides between God and existence. With Mikra being the purest divine, but the least understandable, meaning it's not all the details and it's comes down in brief, only in story form. Talmud, on the other extreme, being the most understandable, meaning it's explained through questions and lack of clarity that is clarifying, with Mishnah being something in between, because Mishnah on one hand is Baal Peh, Tersha Baal Peh, so it's not Chochma, Ilah, it's Binah, but on the other hand, it's received generation by generation, so it has a clarity that the Tanoim, the Talmudic, the Baalei HaMishnah, the authors of the Mishnah, Rabbeinu HaKadosh, and his colleagues, all the way to Rav and Shmuel and Rabbi Yechanan, as he spelled out, all are under the effect and were being illuminated by the Chochma law that was passed on generation to generation all the way from Moshe. But that's for that level. Once you get to the next generation, where b'machshakim, where it's a state of darkness and things are not clear, that's where the Talmud comes in. And I'm not going now into all the details, but bottom line is that when you do that type of clarity through darkness, you reach into the source, the Sheresh HaMakar, the root source of Chochma law, all the way in Keser. So you're actually drawing down even higher levels than what is revealed in Chochma, in the Nekud of Chochma, in the written Torah, and the Nekud of Chochma as it radiates and illuminates Mishnah in Teresh Baal Peh. Because you're reaching that essential source. That is briefly a summary of these 3 levels. And Chochma and Binah, of course, play a tremendous role. That was the last piece we learned about. Binah Yaser Nitna Be'isha. The same idea you see in birthing. You see the man, the male, Chochma provides the seed. That's the Nekud. So everything is concentrated there, but it's not revealed. Binah, the woman, like a woman is the one that is like, not just has that she carries the ovaries and the eggs and the womb that carries the child where it's developed. So the seed alone, without that, will not give birth to a child. On the other hand, the seed is the fertilizer. So we talked about how Chochma and Binah interact with each other and complement each other, and both are necessary. But then, like he said, by Yem Chasanose, that the imay, the mother, is the one that places the crown, the keser, as we learned in the previous on page 1384, the bottom, and 1385. I'm just summing up what the last thing that we learned. So in general, this is the difference between Teresh B'Ksav and Teresh B'Alpeh in general. Chochma and Binah. Specifically, Teresh B'Alpeh breaks especially between Mishnah and Talmud. U'b'derech prat u'b'Talmud shu pirush u'bira Mishnah. Because the halachas in the Mishnah, even they still have that clarity, the crystal clarity that comes from the generations past. As he explains, I'm just summing up again, middle of page 1385. Like Moshe Rabbeinu, who knew everything from the written Torah, and the Tanoim knew everything from the Mishnah. Talmud is now that the Chochma gets concealed. And they come to explain and interpret the Mishnah according to their understanding with great effort and exertion, until they're able to extract and draw out that clarity. And where are they drawing it from? From the root and source of Chochma that's higher than Gilui. So even though everything is based on the written Torah, my time of Omakra, but they're still not in a revealed way. It's still in a concealed state. And they bring it out through their effort. And that's why the halachas that they innovate through their debates and their discussions and their deliberation is lamayla min halacha sheba b'derech Kabbalah. Like we said earlier, it says, Arev malai divrei sofrim yosem yaina shel Torah. That's the words of the sofrim, of the scribes. And here we're talking about the scribes are these scholars that are drawing out the ideas, and they're connecting to the Sefer, the scribe, which is the Hashem, the source of all the material. Shlishi Hamadaber. So all of that is what they draw. That is even higher than you said. Sheba b'derech Kabbalah. L'mayla min halacha sheba b'derech Kabbalah. Then the last piece was the parentheses, and then what followed the parentheses. I'll just review that. So he says, look in the Rambam, where the Rambam says Rav Ashi was the 40th generation from Moshe. 40 is, of course, the level of Binah, Ben Aboim LeBinah. That's when a person comes to really appreciate their teacher at 40 years. So you see the idea of Binah in Teresh B'Alpeh in the end of the Talmud. Rav Ashi was the conclusion of the time of the Talmud, of the Amoraim. And then he adds that the Rebbe Rashab says, I heard in the name of the Alter Rebbe that till the Taz and Shach, they wrote their compilation, they wrote their works in Beruach HaKodesh. And Ruach HaKodesh is also connected to revealing the secrets from the Helem of Chochma. Okay. And we discussed at length, that includes obviously all the Achreinim, all the way till Taz V'Shach. After that, there's not the Ruach HaKodesh, but it doesn't mean it's not informed by these deeper truths, but it doesn't have quite that power as well. And then finally, after the parentheses, he said that this is the conclusion. This is why Talmud is in Beriya, because the Talmud enters into a state of where there's darkness, and you don't have the clarity of the Torah as you do in the written Torah and the Mishnah. Okay, that's Talmud Bavli. That's the concealment of Eirach Chochmah. Talmud, and there, that's why it comes into a state of darkness with many questions and concealments. Dafka in Talmud, that's himshichu b'chinas elyon yesa. They were able to draw down a higher level of revelation, a light, to radiate and illuminate the darkness from the Helem of Chochma. And there's the Gili Eira Emes that everybody sees that clarity. So that's what Binah ultimately does. It brings the clarity of Chochma into that in a way that everybody sees it in a very absolute, clear way, compelling way, and in a way that removes all questions and all doubts, like he called it earlier, sigim, pselis, any things, any sediment that is left over. That's what this clarity is achieved through the process of Talmud Bavli. And with that, he concludes the end of the paragraph on top of page 1386. And that's where we stop. And I'm ready to continue unless somebody wants to ask anything about what I just summed up. Connecting it to the central theme, let's remember that from page 1350 and on, we began talking about Torah that Torah is an illuminating force, an illuminating blueprint that God gives us, that guides us through the darkness of this world. So it's all about discussing the yichud, the unit, the interface between the divine and existence, mamayla lamata. That's really where we're going here at the end of the day. Mamayla lamata, that Torah is illuminating. But the mamayla lamata of Torah illuminates even in a state of darkness, which does have an element of our effort. Now, the next section, he's going to take us back to 22 pages earlier, where he said that Mikra Mishnah Talmud corresponds to the three examples for Makabel, Malchus. And if you remember the moonlight, the luminous stone, a stone that shines, that glows, and the third, Hariyah, the eyesight, the light of the eye, the sight of eyesight. And that's what he's going to go to the next section to connect it to that. Now, just to put it into context, remember those three examples came after the Rebbe Rashab said that he's going to explain it all with Hariyah. So the real operative concept that he really wants to get to, and we're going to learn about this in the next many, many pages, is the vision, where on one hand, our eyes see, but on the other hand, today, the eyes need an outside light to support our vision. In other words, in a dark room, as much as your eyes can see, without an external light, you won't be able to see. So we're going to get back to that later. Hariyah is going to be discussed beginning, just to give you a little lay of the land here, Hariyah is on page 1398. So before he's going to get, that's another 12 pages. So right now, on 1386, he's going to start with Halavana, which corresponds to Talmud. Then of an Evan Toiv, of a luminous or glowing stone, is going to be like Mishnah. And then on page 1398, he's going to go back to Riyah. He never explicitly says it's Mikra, but we can definitely extrapolate that. So we'll get to that when we get there. That's what we're going to learn now. So if you go back to page 1364, so he said to understand the three levels of Makabel, Malchus, which is all about understanding that's Makabel of bringing the of Torah into existence, the of Elikus into existence, which is of course the central theme of Ayin Beis. He said, "V'yesh levaydein al pi hagdama." 2 lines from the bottom of 1364. Let's explain that. We'll explain this idea al pi according to with an introduction. And now, if you look here, where we're learning now, the new paragraph on page 1386, the pages can be found at ayinbeis.com. Al pi hagdama zu, the same word. So al pi hagdama, we just had an hagdama. The hagdama was 22 pages. And after that, he says, according to this hagdama, yuvan gimel inyanim anal. Now we'll understand these three inyanim, these three different aspects. The Eir HaLevana, the light of the moon, the Evan Tev, and the light of a luminous glowing stone, Ba'er Hariyah, Ba'ayin, and the light of the vision in the eye. Shenizbar Le'il. That was explained earlier, as I said, begin at bottom of page 1364 and earlier. So now, according to this Hagdama of Mikra Mishnah Talmud, he's now going to explain these three examples, these three types of light. Shezehu, we learned, what did we learn? Shenizbar Le'il. We learned earlier. Shenizbar Le'il, Shezehu b'chinas Malchus the Beriya. That's the moon. Well, Malchus the Yetzirah. And Malchus the Yetzirah is like the luminous stone. And Malchus the Asiyah like Eir Hariyah. V'hainu. What is that? What Malchus does that mean? It's referring to Malchus. I know b'chinas Malchus. That's Atzilus. K'moshehi b'Beriya v'Yetzirah v'Asiyah. So it's Malchus. It all starts with Malchus of Atzilus, because that's what channels Chabad Chagas Nehi of Atzilus into Beriya, Yetzirah, and Asiyah. So it's Malchus, that Atzilus, as it flows into Malchus of Beriya, as it flows into Malchus of Yetzirah, as it flows into Malchus of Asiyah. That's vital because if you remember, he reconciled that originates in Chabad Chagas and he of Atzilus. But then it manifests, each one in this world, Talmud and Beriya, and Mishnah and Yetzirah, and Mikra and Asiyah, but in which part of Asiyah? The Malchus of each of those worlds. So that's what he said earlier. So he says, now, according to this introduction, we'll now understand the meaning behind this. So he's now going to explain it in that context. Now, why is this so vital? Because again, this is all going to help us understand different ways that we connect to godliness. Like when you read Mikra, you're not going to have a full understanding of what God wants of you. Because the mitzvahs there are very brief, they don't have details, and a lot of it is in story form, as we discussed. In Mishnah, you get it broken down. But in Talmud, it really comes down into an operative and working document. Like we learned earlier, the Melech can give instructions, but you have to sometimes spell out those instructions to know exactly what to do. So therefore, these three levels is essentially in Shtalshalus, Beriya, Yetzirah, Asiyah, coming from Atzilus, are three stages in this process of connecting good divine will and wisdom of Torah, from the written Torah into the oral Torah, into Mishnah, into Talmud. So now he's going to explain. Atzilus, I'm sorry. Atzilus, like we learned in Atzilus, Atzilus is a world of truth, of seamless truth, is godliness. So the Eira Chochma, the clarity of God's wisdom, radiates there in a completely undiluted and unadulterated fashion. Like we say, the Abi law, the supernal father, which is Chochma law, Mekanana B'Atzilus. It's a statement from Zohar. Or is it Zohar? Yeah, it's Zohar. Which Mekanana means nests in Atzilus. Binah nests in Beriya. But Chochma nests in Atzilus. So Atzilus is consumed by Chochma law. And that's the level, as we learned, that's the clarity of Torah in the purest form in Atzilus. The Bechlolos Atzilus, who shemer b'chinas HaChochma. That in general, even though Atzilus has all 10 spheres, Chochma, Binah, Das, Chesed, Gvura, etc., but what is the dominant sphere that dominates in Atzilus is mer b'chinas HaChochma. V'kamesh kosher be'etz Chaim shar mem zayin perik gimel. Like he says in Eitz Chaim. So maybe it's an Eitz Chaim, not Atzilus, Zohar. Okay. Avol Beriya, when you get to the next world, Beriya, Ein Meir B'chinas HaChochma. In Beriya, Chochma gets more concealed. What radiates in Beriya? Ki'im B'chinas Binah d'Atzilus. Binah d'Atzilus is what radiates primarily in Beriya. Like the next part of the expression is the Imei law, the supernal mother, Binah, Mekanana B'Kursaya. Binah nests in Kursaya. Kursaya is Kisei, is a throne. Which is the world of the throne, is the world of Beriya. It's the expression, Kursaya. Al Yedei HaYislapshus B'chinas Malchus d'Atzilus. So Binah of Atzilus travels and is funneled and channeled through Malchus of Atzilus and nests where? In Beriya. So Beriya is essentially the dominant place of Beriya, of Binah of Atzilus. Ubetoich b'chinas habinah, and within this level of Binah in Beriya, melubish b'chinas hachochma. This level of Binah, which nests in Beriya, is melubish. It obviously has Chochma within it. It's not separate. Melubish b'chinas Chochma. Raksha Binah nasa b'chinas mosach l'gaba Chochma. But even though it has Chochma within it, but Binah has become like a curtain that essentially is a filter, so to speak, a channeler of Chochma. So it's not pure Chochma in its purest form in the Nakuda. It's now going through the filter of Binah. Moshe Kosa Be'etz Chaim Sham. Like he writes in Eitz Chaim there. After explaining what is Atzilus and Chochma, then he says, in Beriya, that is Binah, that's where Binah nests, but it's now going through the curtain the filter of Binah. Behind she'era chochma misalim. What does a curtain do? When a light shines through your window, so you have a bright light, or a light shining without any filters, it's just a pure bright light. A curtain, what does it do? It doesn't change, it doesn't completely eliminate the light, but it diffuses it. And sometimes in a very powerful way. So it's no longer that original light. So the misalim chochma gets concealed through this curtain of Binah. So when you're elaborating and developing an idea in all its details, so obviously Chochma is informing it. We learned earlier, Chochma Tachaya Ba'alel. The idea is coming from Chochma. And Chochma has everything concentrated in it, and it even gives the power of the expansiveness of Binah. But it's Binah that in that process, Chochma gets concealed, and without that connection, open connection, you could also wander off and lose and leave the reservation or lose sight of the point of departure. So it's in a form of misalam b'chinas hachachma within Binah. V'zeu ke'inyan halavana, and that's like the lavana. That's like the moon. What is the moon? Shemekabelas me'ir hashemesh. On one hand, the moon receives the light from the sun, receives light from the light of the sun, sunlight. B'chinas shemesh havaya. So the sun is compared to havaya. Shemesh havaya mogen shemesh mogen Hashem Elokim. So shemesh is compared to havaya, a state of pure gilui. Shezeh b'chinas hachachma. That's the level of chachma, the sun. The mashpia. It's a source of light, clarity. Ba'ir misalim ba'alavona. And then when that sunlight enters into the moon, that reflects the sunlight, it gets concealed. It no longer has that intensity of the sunlight. So it's as if the sunlight has gone through a curtain. Not exactly, obviously, it's not a curtain in that sense, but conceptually, the light has been diffused, the light has been concealed. So even though the Levana is receiving sunlight, it's been concealed in the moon. And the second point is this. Now, the moon, that is radiating light. When you look up in the sky, you see the moon. You could even walk to moonlight. Moonlight does illuminate. It doesn't create a daylight like the sun, but the moon does give some light, gives off light. What's radiating? It's not sunlight. It's not like a mirror of the sun. It's now become part of, it becomes so-called internalized, and that's the word I want to use. It becomes moonlight. You don't call the moon sunlight, diminished sunlight. That would be sunlight within clouds, or a sun that is not completely shining, whatever, by sunset or sunrise. That's all the sun. The sun in different stages. So midday, or when the sun is at its strongest, you'd call it at full intensity. When the sun is either behind clouds, or when the sun is weaker due to, as I said, when it's about to set and so on, it's still sunlight. And you call moonlight, even though the moon would not have any light without the sun, but it's been transformed. The moon has retained it in a way that now has become moonlight. We learned earlier that there were two opinions. Is it the sun that's now being channeled through the moon, or does the moon have its own light that's been triggered by the sun? But regardless, in either way, it's definitely not sunlight now. You can't call the moon sunlight. You don't even call it reflected sunlight. You say the moon's light, where is it getting from? It's getting it from the sun. But it's called Er Alavana, not Er HaShemesh. Yes, it's only that it receives it from the sun, but it's become its own light. A mirror, you can't say that. If I will use the mirror to reflect sunlight, you don't say the mirror has now become its mirror light. You don't call it that. The mirror is simply reflecting sunlight. It's not atzma. The mirror doesn't have its own light. The moon has its own light. Again, the question is, does that light, the sunlight, just channel through the moon? Or does the moon also have some element of its own that needs to be triggered and stimulated by sunlight? But regardless, you call it moonlight. It's a different type of light, even though it's being received. So essentially, it's not like a mirror. Think of a student and a teacher. When the student is receiving an idea from his teacher, and he internalizes it, and he integrates it, right? And it becomes part of his thinking, then he goes to teach the idea to someone else. Whose idea is it? So on one hand, he received it from his teacher. It's not his own original idea, but it's gone through his filter. It's become his. He's internalized it. So he's preserving the integrity of the original of the sun, but you can't call it the teacher's wisdom without his filter. He's explained it. He's brought it into new words, new explanations. So you have a similar, not the seichel of the student. The seichel of the student was not created by the teacher. Teacher is not his parent. So his very brain is his own. But the idea that was conveyed to him is that mashpia would be, in this example, the teacher, the sun. The student would be the moon, and we would be the recipients of the student. So we're receiving Eir Alavona that received from the Eir Hashemesh, but became filtered through the moon. And this is why now he's comparing it to what we just learned, Ke'inyan Talmud. This is like what Talmud is all about. First thing we learned is Talmud, the Eir HaChochma in the Mishnah and the Mikra is not radiating in a revealed way. So right here you have already a concealment, just like the concealment of the sun when it comes to the moon, through a mosach, through a curtain. So the Eir HaChochma of Atzilus, which he's comparing here to Chochma or the Shemesh, is not radiating begili. V'hu b'chinas cheshach. Like we said, a Beriya cheshach, zeh inyan u'Beriya cheshach. That's why Beriya is connected to cheshach, the level of Talmud, machshakim. It's a level of darkness because we don't have the clarity. The Amoraim come, they start learning the Mishnah, and there's a lot of questions. Some things they understand, but a lot of things need to be clarified. So what needs to happen? The students, the Amoraim now, the Talmud, Chachmei Talmud, like the moon, have to develop an Eir Atzma. By studying and struggling with the idea, they now explain it with their seichel. Because they didn't hear this from their teachers. From what they heard from their teachers is still unclear. So what they received from the sun has been concealed. So now when they develop the idea, it's Eir Atzma hu shamer esacheshach. And that's what now illuminates the darkness. So the Talmud is a perfect example of Levana. I don't know, perfect is not maybe the right word, but it's a good example because that's what it does. The moon comes to shine in the night. The sun shines in the day, or the sun creates the day. The sun, everything is clear. It's complete transparency, complete light. It's the moon, the sunlight, and now diffuses it and channels it and filters it to illuminate where the darkness, in this case, the darkness is the lack of clarity that we have. We don't have the Eir HaChochma shining. So like we just said about Talmud, same thing with the Levana. The light of the sun gets concealed within it. And now it's not just a reflection of the sun, it's shining with its own light. Yes, that light originates from the sun. Just like the Amoraim, the Talmudic scholars did not come up with their own ideas. Everything that they're learning is taken from what they've learned, but they're adding their personal explanation of it. And that's why the moon is not just called a recipient, it's also called a luminary. Like we say in the Pasuk, it says God on the fourth day created Shnei Me'eres Hagdelim, two great luminaries. Then he called the Moed HaGadol was the sun, Moed HaKatan, the small luminary is the moon. The large luminary is the sun, but it's called a Moed. It's not just called a Makabel. It is an Eir Makabel because it's receiving from the sun, but it's in a way that it itself has become a Moed. Not with the same level of light like the sun, but it shines. Like I said before, you can walk to the light of the moon. The light of the moon does illuminate. It's not, when a night, if the moon is completely concealed, you can't see anything. You can't say, I'm not talking about street lights. I'm talking about if you're in a place where there's no human, no manufactured, no electricity, no human lights, no candles, no flashlights, and so on. So the moon is called a moyer. The ima yeshe b'chinas er makabel, even though what type of moyer is it? It's an er makabel because it does not shine on its own without the sunlight, levad. Even though it's only an er makabel, b'kol mokim, nevertheless, mepnei sheme'ira b'kayach atzma, because the moon has something that God created it that it should give off light. That's why it's called a moyer. Hariyunikra moyer. That's why it's called a moyer. It's just not the same light like the sun. So it's an interesting paradox. On one hand, the moon receives. On the other hand, it has the power to shine. Let's go back to the example of the student. If the student didn't have his own seichel, was not able to shine to other students, then he would just be like a funnel, like a teacher who, let's say, records his teachings and inputs it into AI, and AI spits it out. That's not that. Well, I don't know if that's a good example, because that could be like the student. The point I want to make is that the student does have his own intelligence to integrate and to explain what the teacher said. So it's not just the teacher's light just passing through the student. The student is developing it. So the same thing here. The moon is a makabel. For it to get oir, it needs to receive it from the sun, or at least it needs the sun to stimulate its own light. But then the moon itself is shining. By night, the sun is not there. When we see the moon shining at night, the sun is the other part of the earth. The other half of the lower hemisphere at that point is being illuminated by the sun. So it's not the sun is shining through the moon. So it's true, the moon is reflecting the sun even then, even though we don't see the sun, but it's now moonlight. That's the moir. So the teacher is not there physically. What we're receiving is from the moon. And that's why it's called a moir. So the Talmud, on one hand, everything that's in the Talmud we learned is my time in the Hamakra, is based on the written Torah and on the Mishnah. The Talmud doesn't come and just out of nowhere starts sharing ideas. It takes a line of the Mishnah, like we learned, let's say Eila Hadvarim from the Pasuk, and then develops it and says, from there we derive the 39 malachas. But it's taking it from the verse and from the lines in the Mishnah. So it's coming from the sun. However, it's now been filtered through the wisdom of these Talmudic sages, and that's why we understand it. That's why it's illuminating the dark. The Mishnah alone and the Mikra were not clear, would not illuminate the dark. So on one hand, it's receiving it from there, but on the other hand, it's doing something that Chochma does not have a power to do on its own, which is to illuminate. Chochma can illuminate those that already know. So that's where someone who understands idea can just take the concentrated point of the Nekudah of Chochma and he gets it. Like we learned earlier with Moshe and the Tanoim, they look in the Pasuk or they look in the Mishnah, it's all clear. But what about in the dark? What about those living in the dark that don't see it in the Mishnah? You know, you hear a speaker speak, or you read something. So those that are trained and experienced, they say they get it. What about those that don't get it? That's a chiddush. There you need the Talmud, Chachmei Talmud. That's where the moon comes in. The moon is shining for those that can't see can't see the light of the sun, because it's not illuminated, because it's dark, night, machshakim. But the moon itself, even though it's called the makabel, that's meir and nikra moyer. Okay, let me stop here for any questions, if there are any questions. Okay. So he continues. So Kamoi came b'bchinas malchus de Beriya. So too is it with malchus of Beriya, which is what we're talking about here. Remember, malchus of Beriya that receives from malchus of Atzilus, which is ultimately Binah, which nests in Beriya. Malchus de Beriya shemislabish b'bchinas malchus of Binah da Atzilus. Malchus and Binah of Atzilus manifest within malchus of Beriya. Like again, he's quoting this Eitz Chaim, I see seems to be very fundamental. Quoted already 3 times. The Eitz Chaim, Shar Mem Zayin Perek Gimel. Hainu she'ein eira chochma meir b'gilui. So we're now in a place where the eira chochma of Atzilus is not radiating in a revealed way. That would be like sunlight. Because in general, the revelation of Chochma in general is a Gili Er Mamayla, a light that shines from above, like a Er Mashpia. And the sun receives its power from God, but it was created in a way that it is the source of light. The moon, without the sun, would not give off light. The sun is like a Gili Er Mamayla. It's not an that's traveling through a recipient, like I said, a student or the moon. Shemevi mamshich is a makabel that carries and transmit the light. And that's through the work and the effort of the makabel. Like I said, the student struggles to understand his teacher, and then he teaches it. The same thing is what makabel is about, the levana. Chochma is Mamayla. When God gave the Torah to Moshe Rabbeinu, before Moshe's receiving it, that's a Gili Mamayla. God, Matan Torah, he said, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, Aseres HaDibros, and he taught him the written Torah. Then Moshe began to learn it and understand it and began to internalize it. But essentially, it's Erech Chochma coming from above, Mamayla. Not like an Makabel, which requires already the recipient who's doing his work and effort. This is the air that's radiating from above without any effort. That's the air mashpia that was explained earlier. Remember when he started speaking about air mashpia, air makabel, just refers back to the original place. Was on page here, let's see, all the way long time ago. Yeah. Page 1352. Almost the beginning of this whole section is where he started speaking about Er Mashpia and Er Makabel. Then he spoke Tara Nukva, if you may recall, masculine energy, feminine energy, and that's where he spoke about I'm just looking there quickly, 1 second. Yeah. So referring back to page 1352, okay. That's what Mashpia. Beriya hu shemesalam er chochma. That's er Atzilus, er chochma, er Mashpia. In Beriya is where the misalam er chochma. This er chochma became concealed. Umeir b'chinas Binah. And there is radiating the level of Binah, and also Malchus Atzilus, Malchus of Atzilus, which is already the lowest level in Atzilus. Shazel b'chinus er makabel. So you see here, he's inter-exchanging. Sometimes he calls it Binah, sometimes Malchus. Because remember when he spoke about er makabel, he said that's the Malchus of Atzilus, is makabel. Malchus of Atzilus receives from the higher spheres of Atzilus, because Malchus less lamagam klum has nothing of its own. We learned that earlier, which meant two interpretations. Everything it receives is from above, or everything it receives is from below through Araveda. Then Malchus of Atzilus breaks into three levels: Er Levana, Er Eventev, and Er Hariya. Or he's saying here, Talmud, Mishnah, and Mikra. So the Talmud is compared to Binah. So Binah is Binah, Umalchus Atzilus, Shazel b'chinas Er Makabel. That's the level of Er Makabel. So he's not going into distinguish between Binah and Malchus here, even though obviously they're not the same level. But Binah is also, we learned, is a Makabel from Chochma. And Malchus is a Makabel of all of Atzilus. And that from there it manifests in Beriya, and specifically Malchus of Beriya, and that's the level of Talmud. Which means even though it's receiving from the higher levels, but it becomes its own the of the Makabel. Like the Amirayim, when they learn the Mishnah and explain it, we said it's with their koyach atzmei, it's with their effort, with their seichel atzmei. Because it's not what they heard from their teachers. They heard from their teachers the idea, but now, as they try to analyze it and dissect it and explain it, that's coming b'koyach atzmei. And that's the power that is able to access the Sheresh Shemakra of Chochma that's higher than what they receive from their teachers. Because what they see from the teacher is a certain point, but it's the Nekudah, which is concealed. It's not clear, it's cryptic. And now they're developing it. The Inyan B'Kayach Asmin is Bar Le'il B'Inyan Teir Shabbat Peh B'Chlal U'B'Talmud Bavli B'Frat. And this Kayach Asmin that we're talking about, it was explained earlier when he spoke about Teir Shabbat Peh in general, and specifically Talmud Bavli, because that's where Teir Shabbat Peh comes in its full glory, because Mishnah is still under the influence and the effect, the aura of Chochma law of Mikra, like we learned of Torah Shebiksav. So we learned the Fishazel B'chinas Helam Ha'or. This Koyach Atzma is because there's a Helam Ha'or, the light is concealed. This effort, the Koyach Atzma, what does it achieve? That is able to dig deeper, that exertion, and it reaches to the root and source that's higher than the Gili that they receive. And this Makabel, Koyach Atzma, through his effort, reveals that which was concealed in the concentrated point of Chochma. That's due to the fact that it's drawing from the source and root of Chochma and Keser, or Chochma Stima, as we learned earlier. Okay, so what we've learned here is nothing fundamentally new in the concept. What's new is the connection now, connecting back to Talmud, to the moon, to Er Alavona. That's what he's connecting. Because remember, it all began that those three levels of Er Makabel correspond to Mikra, Mishnah, and Talmud, or Talmud, Mishnah, and Mikra. So that's the main thing that he's emphasizing. So really, the ideas have been stated, but now he's comparing the moon is now the operative example for this level of Talmud. Okay, we're going to stop here. I'll take questions. Then he's going to talk about how it's in the Illuminates. Yeah, we got a good way to go here. Until middle of page 1388, he's going to talk about Evan Tov, the luminous stone. That's going to go for a while until he gets back to Beriya, and that's on page 1398. Okay, good. Any questions, my friends? All clear? Okay. And just to sum up and tie it all together in the context of the general theme, especially what we're focusing on, the bigger picture, all this is going to help us understand how Torah works. And we're going to come to understand that the interaction between Torah and the Neshamas, because we're the ones that learn Torah. So right now we're going to learn how Torah illuminates us. But then we're going to learn, and ultimately, Beriya is going to be the ultimate example, because the eyes see them, they see on their own. The moon does not see, the moon illuminates. It's a moir. But the ultimate is going to be how we see, and we see, however, with an external light of Torah and Malachim and all the help that we get. On the other hand, ultimately, the eye will access the Etzem Koyach Beriya, where it could see on its own. That will be l'asad love, ve'inenu me'iris k'shemesh kiyareach, where our eyes will see like the sun and the moon. That's going to lead us back to ultimately understanding Ner Mitzvah and Torah and the neshama, how it interacts with Mitzvah and Torah, to bring all this light, the Atzmi of Torah, in a way that we become one with it, and the ultimate interface. And we'll bring it all back to Mamat l'mayla, Mamayla l'mata. So it's all going to come together. But right now, we're still learning. Where we are right now is the Torah aspect, illuminating the darkness. If you go back to the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, where Mikta Hashem Elokeinu, Hamagbil L'Sheves, so there's a whole section there where he talks about in Torah, there's two levels, Torah as it is on its own, and Torah as it illuminates the darkness. And there too talks about this power of Torah Shabbat Peh, that is able to access a deeper level because it's going into the source and root of the light, where the light originates from. So we'll make that connection as we go along when he starts tying it all together. So that sums up where we are. And we'll stop here around 3/4 of the way down, page 1386. Again, any questions? Not, I will